Hello again, everybody. I'm Chris Mooneyham, and welcome to the TCA All Sports Report. As always, brought to you by Fox 5 Atlanta, 680 The Fan, and of course, the Touchdown Club of Atlanta. Well, second week of February 2015, and this, the beginning of a very busy time across Georgia high school athletics. It'll be about another month and a half before we will really settle down as far as championships being decided in the winter months and, of course, the start of the spring sports. We'll talk more about that when we get into the third segment of our program that we like to call What's Next. But first, let's take a look at what's happening. This past Saturday at the Georgia Tech Aquatic Center, it was Championship Saturday for the GHSA Swimming and Diving State Championships. The big story, well, there were many big stories. We had some records fall, we had some historic wins, but none more historic than the Lady Longhorns of Lambert. They come away with their third consecutive 6A team state title, and they do it in one of the highest scoring, widest victory margins in state history. They outscored second place Brookwood 433 to 355. That is an absolutely astounding margin and scoring number. In fact, one expert told me at the pool on Saturday that 355 for second place Brookwood and about 80% of the state championships he guessed would be good enough to win the state title. Brookwood at 355 still finishes 80 points behind the three-time state champions. On the guys' side in 6A, the Walton Raiders win their second consecutive state championship by holding off Alpharetta late, 310 to 303.5. The biggest moment of the guys' meet came about halfway through. David Dingus hit the pool in the 100 butterfly, came from behind to win that race, and at the very last moment, he got this last second reaching rally of a victory where he touched the pad, the wall, just before his competitor got the gold medal, first place in that race, and it really lit a fire under his team, and from that moment on, they never relinquished the lead. In the 1A through 5A championship, the Westminster boys took home their first title since 2005. They hold off Marist 309 to 293.5. And one of the feel-good stories of the boys' event came in the third place spot as Chambly reached the podium in finishing just 24 points back of second. Another feel-good story on the girls' side in third place, Oconee County. Many people have told me that's a program on the rise. They finished third by reached the podium by finishing third, 264 to 202.5. That's the margin over St. Pius for Marist. Marist wins the girls' 1A through 5A state championship. Now, time to take a look at one of my favorite segments of the program, our positive athletes from the state of Georgia. We'll start today with Kirsten Sharp. Sharp, a senior softball and tennis athlete from East Paulding High School. She's described by her coaches as a leader both on and off the field. When she's not encouraging her teammates on the field, Kirsten can be found serving as the secretary of her senior class or the vice president of community service in the DECA Club. Or you may find her on the principal's lead team at her high school. Next up is Josh Jones. Jones, a sophomore at North Cobb High School. And although life has forced Josh into a wheelchair, his love is competing in wheelchair track and basketball. You won't be able to find a more well-rounded student athlete than Josh either, who's part of the North Cobb Magnet program. He ranks in the top 20 in his class, and he volunteers as a coach for other wheelchair basketball teams. And finally this week, Matt Combs, football coach at Alexander High School. During the day, Coach Combs teaches students that are at risk of failing in a special online program and also teaches math to students with disabilities. On the field, Coach Combs is known as a coach who gets the big picture, preparing his students and athletes for the future. His mission is to teach each student athlete how to deal with life's adversities. And of course, kudos for helping to turn around a program that is having its best run of success since the 1990s. Coming up next, we answer the question that many of you have. Ever wonder? By the football season of 1970, the state of Georgia and the South were still moving slowly towards the full federal compliance of integration. In this backdrop enters John McKay into the backdrop of the Touchdown Club of Atlanta. For those of you not aware, John McKay, a legendary head coach in college football, won 4 national championships for the Trojans of USC, and of course was then inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame. Now, Coach McKay was to be the keynote speaker at the 1971 Touchdown Club of Atlanta's annual Jamboree. The TCA Jamboree was held every January, immediately following the conclusion of the football season. It was known as a pretty ruckus affair, and of course was well attended in those days. Now, 3 days prior to the event, an Atlanta newspaper called Coach McKay in Los Angeles and informed him that the TCA had never honored an African-American athlete. Upon hearing this information, Coach McKay informed the reporter and then the TCA that he would not attend in protest. A word eventually got back to the president of the club. He then got in touch with Coach McKay and informed him that he was, in fact, the reporter was, misinformed. In fact, he said, just last year, we honored 2 young African-American athletes. Those 2 young men were Richard Appleby, a lineman out of Clark Central, and Larry Bird, another lineman out of Monroe area. Coach McKay then confirmed the story and agreed to attend the 1971 Touchdown Club of Atlanta's annual Jamboree. Just a little part that was played by the TCA and a legendary head coach from all the way out on the West Coast in the move towards equality in the state of Georgia. This week's version of the What's Next portion of our program going to take on that familiar feel of a calendar preview. So often we like to talk about great matches between coaches, great games that are coming up between 2 great individual talents or teams, and of course we'll always preview state championship type matchups. But this week, a really busy week across Georgia high school athletics, so here we go. Soccer and track begin their seasons this week. A lot of people obviously very excited about that. Whenever you start to see these 2 sports taking the field or the rubberized track, you start to think to yourself, brother, spring is right around the corner. The traditional wrestling state championships will be held this weekend coming up at the Macon Centerplex, the 12th through the 14th. That's Thursday through Saturday. Of course, you can check the GHSA.net for scheduling details. The traditional wrestling state championships at the Macon Centerplex, Thursday the 12th through Saturday the 14th. And I mentioned it last week. Want to gloss over it again this week because we're going to talk about it a lot, as I mentioned, over this next month. Basketball begins their region tournaments this week. And a lot more tournaments begin on Monday than in the past. So it's going to start right from the beginning of the week. Remember, teams that reach the semifinals of their region tournaments, that's how you earn an automatic bid into the state tournament. The state tournaments, which begin in, less than a week, because Monday the 9th is when region tournaments begin, and just next week, next Tuesday, is when, Tuesday the 17th is when the state tournament for basketball begins. Coming up next, my favorite portion of the program, a little portion we like to call My Take. A strange thing has happened in recruiting over the last 10 years for sure, maybe 15, maybe even longer stretch of years. Kids do not commit to universities anymore because of the university, or at least it doesn't seem as though they do that as much as they used to. Obviously, I'm being a hyperbolic broadcaster when I say that no kids are committing to a university because of the university anymore. We all know that kids do that. But so often now, it seems, more and more than ever before, kids are committing to the coaches that are at said university. These kids nowadays, now I really sound like an old man, but a lot of these kids playing today with the glut of media and the opportunity to see every university from all corners of the country really do not have favorite teams like they used to. Roquan Smith, in 1989, I got news for you. Roquan Smith from Macon County, the most famous situation of a kid who's committed to a school but has yet to sign his LOI. You all know the situation out there. In 1989, there's not a chance in hell that Roquan Smith would not have gone to the University of Georgia. There's absolutely zero chance. But that's kind of my point. Kids don't commit to the universities the way they used to. They commit to these coaches. And that's a very, very dangerous situation. Because as we all know, the dichotomy of the situation is these coaches, their tenures at these universities are all very, very short-lived. And we know that because their tenures at these universities are so short-lived, if you're not having success, sometimes you find yourself potentially straight out lying to a recruit. Whereas even if you're the head man in a program that is having success, you end up lying to the kid for a different reason. Because all of a sudden you run out of room. You run out of a scholarship for a kid because now where you thought you were only going to sign 2 running backs, number 20 and 25 in the country, all of a sudden the running back that's ranked number 10 in the country wants to come to your university. And so you now have to turn around and tell the kid at the bottom of your recruiting board, I'm sorry, son, we don't have a scholarship available for you. So in the end, who's to blame? The kids? No, absolutely not. The kids are not to blame. Some of these kids are wanting to go on to university, play football, do what they love. They're kids after all. They want to further their education and get to play a little football and potentially make it to the league. Are the coaches to blame? No, I don't think they're to blame the most anyway. Who's to blame the most? That's the real question. And I don't think it's the coaches. It's a job. You're doing what you've got to do. You got to put food on the table, and that's a laughable statement considering what some of these coaches make, but you understand my point. Are the administrators at the universities to blame? The ADs, the Foleys, all these guys? No, I don't think that's it either. And certainly, I don't think that the media is fully to blame either. In fact, the problem is, it's everyone in the equation. And the real problem is, I don't think we can go back. Because we've now started this vicious cycle where Roquan Smith finds out after his announcement that his defensive recruiting coach has acquired a job in the National Football League for Dan Quinn and the Atlanta Falcons, where that defensive coach did his former coach, who gave him a big-time break in the business, a solid, as we like to call it, and said, I tell you what I'll do. I won't announce it until after signing day. That way we can still get these kids in. But I'm sorry, I've got to take this job, Jim. In other words, telling Jim more of that. So Roquan finds out, and now he doesn't know if he wants to go to UCLA. C.C. Jefferson decides he's going to Florida, finds out that his defensive line coach, or defensive coach Terrell Williams, who's recruiting him, is now going to go on to the National Football League. He finds out during signing day and doesn't sign his LOI. Then, of course, there's Devontae Lampkin, pardon me. Kid decides he's going to sign with Texas, finds out that he finds out on signing day that the defensive coordinator who recruited him is now, well, guess what? On his way to take the job at Florida for the last guy that we just mentioned. The real problem with this situation is that Lampkin was told the day before by Charlie Strong that that coach was not leaving the program. Then, of course, there's Urban Meyer at Ohio State, who most likely lied to Mike Weber, a running back out of Detroit, as far as scholarships being available. And now Weber may end up at Michigan, of all places. But as if those 4 instances were not enough, then there's always the case of Matt Colburn, a fine running back, the South Carolina Player of the Year, who I was fortunate enough to cover in the National Select 7-on-7 tournament, the passing camps, over the summer in Hoover, Alabama. The kid had a Dutch Fork, had a Louisville offer on the table. And then on Monday, 2 days before National Signing Day, Louisville called him and pulled the scholarship. Their claim, Tony Grantham's claim, he was the coordinator at Louisville, claimed that 3 defensive backs in our program have told us now that they're going to the National Football League. So I can't afford to sign another running back. We got to go after another defensive back and use your scholarship for that. And of course, people are arguing with him, telling him that he knew for a fact, sources are saying for a fact, that he knew 2 of those DBs at least were going to the National Football League. But you see, that's the trade of the business. Kids should not commit to the coaches. They should commit to the university. Kids should understand the plight of the situation, the plight of the coaches. And after all, coaches shouldn't even be in that situation. A situation that's created by the big dollars that are brought in by these universities because of the media glut and the demand of ADs. And after all, where does all that start? Well, it starts with you and me, the fan. It's all just a vicious cycle. Because then, you and I, we teach our kids to be University of Georgia fans. And that kid then goes on to commit to a coach when he or she decides to play college football. Until next week, I'm Chris Mooneyham for the TCA All Sports Report.